Hello and welcome to Football Talk by the Two Point Conversion. My name is Dylan Jackson. Today, I'm joined by draft expert for the Two Point Conversion, Jacob LeQuire. Jacob, how are you doing today?
Doing well, doing well. It's getting harder to have these kind of late night football episodes with days getting pushed back, but next week we will have the true late night episode as we'll be getting ready for the draft. Less than 10 days away now. It's pretty exciting.
It's really exciting. And there's a lot of things taking shape in the draft. It seems like Cam Ward is all but certain to be the first overall pick. You've got Shador Sanders working out with the Giants this week. Really, the Giants working out with a plethora of quarterback prospects. I wonder if there's some sort of ownership mandate there. But I want to talk to you first. We recently launched our NFL draft guide for the 2 point conversion. There's 100+ player profiles, 100+ comparisons, over 170 names in that guide via the positional rankings. We worked on it a ton and we're kind of super proud to see the full product launch. Jacob, what was your experience kind of working on this guide? The amount of work that went into it, all of the player profiles that we did. Kind of describe your experience creating this guide with me, with Steve, with our graphic designer Colt. Just the overall kind of process that went into it.
For sure. So I've been doing my own draft guides. I think this is year 4 now, and I'm used to kind of writing my notes and then hoarding it for myself. Maybe talking to one or two of my friends, like, "Oh, this guy's going to be really good. Trust me, I watched this." But working with other people, other kind of points of view on players and stuff like that, and then getting into it with Colt about how the guide should look. And if you're watching on Twitter or YouTube, you can just see how beautiful the style of the guide is. It was really fun. I think it's good to work with others to see different points of view. Like, kind of, I was lower on a lot of players, and you guys gave me kind of direction on how you see them. And then I'm like, oh, maybe I missed something, and I was able to go back and watch and appreciate players for different things that each of us liked. Myself, you, and Steve, and then to be able to come together, kind of do the reports on each one, edit each other's thing, look and see, oh, this guy fits in here. This guy might not be the best overall at his position. The back and forth there, it was just really valuable for me to work collaboratively on something like this. And you can see the final product, just how good it looks and how thorough it is. I'm pretty proud of doing this, and I'm happy to share in the experience of doing something creative like this with you guys.
Yeah, this was truly one of the coolest projects I think I've ever worked on. Just from the content itself, there's a ton of information on this guide. Like, every single one of these player profiles has strengths, weaknesses, a bio, a grade, school, measurables, their ranking among both positional and overall in our top 100, and then a player comparison as well. So there's just a ton of information, and I think Colt could not have done a better job. I mean, you can see just this graphic for the cover. This Travis Hunter
Mhm.
graphic looks phenomenal. He did an incredible job designing the guide, putting it together. Just we're super excited to have him on the team. He's had the kind of creative direction for the entire website for the 2 point conversion as a whole. But if you guys haven't checked out our guide already, you can scan this QR code that I'm going to put on the screen right now. And it's like I kind of mentioned earlier, it's $1 for a limited time. It's 90% off. It's our launching kind of promo that we have going on right now. So be sure to check it out. There's a lot of information I hope you guys enjoy. But with that out of the way, let's get into what we're actually talking about today. And that's the pivot points in the NFL draft. So we made a list of, 4 or 5 teams that could really drive how the first round of the 2025 draft looks. And we're going to kick it off with the New England Patriots. So this is a really interesting team. I think everybody knows that their needs are pretty set. They need a receiver, even though they signed Stephon Diggs. They're going to need an offensive tackle, really multiple offensive linemen. They need playmakers on defense. I want to get your input on the New England Patriots and kind of what direction you expect them to go, as well as maybe a sleeper sort of pick with this fourth overall pick, because after Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, I'm not so sure the fourth overall pick is as set as what the most common mock draft that you'll see Will Campbell with this fourth overall pick. I'm not sure is as set as what you may see in those.
For sure. And you mentioned it, right? The first three picks, I would be surprised at this point if it weren't Cam Ward and then some combination of Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter. Maybe we get a little trade in there if somebody wants to swap picks or something, but I think those three are going to be the top three guys we hear on Thursday. But then you're right. The New England Patriots, one of the worst rosters, even still, with the free agent additions they've added. A lot of needs there. I would say maybe the Saints are the only worst roster. And then at pick 4, they have their pick of the litter, right? You could say the draft kind of starts at pick 4. I think we all know that they need offensive linemen, particularly left tackle, right? So Will Campbell is a natural fit there, and I think that's been the number one chalk pick, if you will, that's been funneled to the Patriots, right? Because that's their biggest need. But is that the best value, right? I think Ashton Jeanty is a top 3 player in this class. So Mike Vrabel is used to having his bell cow back. Could that be an Ashton Jeanty sleeper team? Jalen Walker seems to be the talk of the town over the past month in the draft process, right? Incredibly high character, like the true leader of the Georgia team this past year. Could we see him sliding up to the 4th pick if the Patriots are remorseful that they miss out on Abdul Carter? Mason Graham is my number 4 player, best D lineman in the class. I talked about that today on today's episode of Perfect Takes. Really, really good player. But then they also need offensive weapons, right? Ted McMillan, could he be a sleeper guy? Or Tyler Warren, if Mike Vrabel is so inclined to using somebody in such a unique way. This is really where the draft starts to me. I just mentioned, 4 or 5 players, and all of them different positions, right? They could go in truly any direction except for probably QB at this point. I think they're pretty satisfied with what Drake May was able to do in his freshman season.
I really like the Ashton Jeanty shout. He's somebody that, isn't really talked about with this 4th overall pick. But like you said, Mike Vrabel loves having a bell cow type of running back. He had Derrick Henry in Tennessee when he was the coach there. I think that Jeanty, when a lot of teams seek, selecting offensive weapons for their team, a lot of people like to think, receiver, having a primary pass catcher, that sort of thing. But oftentimes teams value adding a running back. It gives your offense a dynamic that it doesn't have. And, Jeanty is overall the best offensive weapon that the Patriots are likely going to be in a position to add in this draft, right? I know it's a running back, and a lot of people are going to scoff at the idea of a running back in, the top 5. But in this draft, when, after the first 2 non-quarterbacks are taken, I think there's a real drop off in the caliber of prospect that you're going to get. So even if, Jeanty is a running back, he's still probably the best overall player that's going to be available with this pick. He's not a left tackle. He's not an edge rusher, but he's somebody that is going to give the Patriots, 4 years of high production on a rookie deal. I think that's pretty valuable, even if it's not something that is going to be considered, extra value on the 4th overall pick. But I like the Jalen Walker shout as well. He's somebody that I mocked to the Patriots in my most recent mock draft. Like you said, high character guy, very versatile player. I know that there's going to be concerns about him potentially being a tweener, maybe not being best at an edge rusher position or a linebacker position, but I think he's just a really good football player and seems like the type of guy that Mike Vrabel would love to add to the New England locker room. We'll see if it's too rich for the 4th overall pick, but he's somebody whose stock is, seemingly been rising over the past month or so. So I really like those 2. And of course, Will Campbell obviously is, I think, one of the better offensive tackles in this class, along with M'Boom. I prefer M'Boom slightly, but he's kind of a carbon copy of Mike Onwenu, who's already on the Patriots. So I think that they're probably more likely to take a guy like, Will Campbell, get a blindside protector for Drake May. But a lot of people, I think, are anticipating Campbell being, a lock for the fourth overall
Mhm.
pick, assuming Hunter and Carter are gone, where I'm just not necessarily sure that's the case. I think it's probably more of like a 40-ish% chance.
Yeah, I'm with you. And to the Genty point, that's kind of like my guilty pleasure fit for the top five group there in the draft. We talk about how there may not be the surplus value of a rookie
Right.
running back being taken in the top 10 or top five, even to that level. Last time we saw it was with Saquon Barkley. But it's about taking the pressure off of Drake May. And if you're not convicted that Tedero McMillan can do that, you certainly won't be with Matthew Golden that high, maybe not even Tyler Warren. And while we think about these receivers as, oh, if we can get him 12 catches a game, he's a high end number one receiver. Ashton Genty is going to touch the ball 20 to 25 times, right? So
Right.
you're taking the pressure off of Drake May, even if it's not blocking for him or getting him someone to throw to. It's helping improve the offense. It's helping him develop. I feel the same way about pick 10 with Caleb Williams and the Bears, right? If Genty falls there, or Amarian Hampton. I think we've both mocked Amarian Hampton to the Bears in some of the mock drafts we've put out. And it's just about taking the best players, right? Draft good players and good results will follow. Outside of Travis Hunter, there's no better player or better good player to take than Ashton Genty.
I can't remember who reported it, but there was somebody, some insider said that a scout or a coach or somebody told them that, you take your running back like Ashton Genty and you know that you're at least going to have a hit on your resume. And
Mhm.
that's kind of invaluable to at least younger GMs where, there's not as much of a track record. Getting a guaranteed or as close to a guaranteed star as you can get, with the top 5 pick, it really insulates the floor, even if it's not going to, like you said, give you surplus value at the position. So moving on, let's talk about the Saints with the 9th overall pick. I think this is arguably the most interesting draft pick of the entire first round. The Saints kind of came out, they announced, all right, I don't know if they announced it, but it was reported that Derek Carr is, going to have surgery. He's not going to be ready for 2025. That kind of puts in question that 9th overall pick. It's kind of previously been reported that the Saints have been doing their due diligence on the quarterback class, whether it's Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart, Tyler Shuck has been a name that's been thrown out. Maybe he's not a guy at number 9 that they would consider, but it seems as though they're going to select a quarterback at some point in the first 2 rounds, right?
Mhm.
I want to get your perspective. Do you think they should take a quarterback?
I don't have any quarterback that matches the 9th overall pick value. From even Cam Ward for me is outside that top 15. I think I'm at 16 on my personal board, but much less Shedeur Sanders or Jalen Milroe, Jackson Dart, Tyler Shuck, all those guys there. But if you are convicted on taking a quarterback early, that kind of erases any of the value question, right? Last year we saw Bo Nix and Michael Penix go within the first 12 picks. And I personally didn't have them anywhere close to being top 12 players, right? I'm sure the consensus board, I'm sure your board didn't have those guys as being close to top 12 players. And so if we're looking at a pick where the second quarterback is going to be taken, if you are willing to take a quarterback, let's say at the back half of the first round, you're certainly going to be willing to take him at pick 9, knowing you don't have to trade down or worry about anything because this is likely the QB2 spot. I know we talked about the Patriots. I think that could be a sneaky trade up spot for a QB team, but if they make it past the Giants and Browns, then you don't really need to trade up. So I think the Saints could be the QB2 spot, but should they be? I think they should take Armand Membu, somebody you mentioned, and continue to build the trenches, continue to work it out, and have a good plan in place for maybe the next QB. Because I know I mentioned I think the Saints have the worst roster of every NFL football team. I think their trenches are really, really bad, and that's kind of what contributes to having that poor roster.
I've long been a Spencer Rattler truther, but he didn't really seem to be, the answer at
Mhm.
at quarterback. I think they drafted him in the 5th round last year, and he had some good moments, but overall, it's just not something that's going to prevent you from drafting a quarterback at 9 if you have conviction on a guy. And I think that's really the key here: is do you have a player that? And I'm not saying you specifically. I'm saying I guess Mickey Loomis in this case, right?
Yeah.
Does he have a player that he has conviction on with the ninth overall pick at quarterback in particular. I think there's been some murmurs that they like Jackson Dart. Whether he's worth the ninth overall pick, I personally would definitely shy away from that. Even Shedeur Sanders, I think he's in the 40s on my personal board. And I'm generally very harsh on quarterbacks. So, I could get behind Sanders in like the late first round. I think that's when his range should probably start. Ninth overall is a bit rich. I think at that point in this draft, maybe the talent's a little bit more flat from picks 5 to 15. But I think you could really add a player in the trenches. Maybe it's another edge rusher. Maybe it's a Kenneth Grant. Maybe it's like you said, Armand Membu. I think that it's a spot where they probably should address like a more I say pressing need as if quarterback's not the most important position, but I think that it's something where they should probably wait just because the value on quarterback isn't there. I think the other question is, if you have conviction on a guy, you have to take them, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if it's at 9, if it's at, 30. I think if you have conviction of a guy that you think could be a franchise quarterback, that's who you're going to select, even if it's, Tyler Shough, 26 years old on week 1, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the other thing with the Saints, and this is a question that I think is interesting to explore, is, the ramifications of potentially punting at quarterback for a year. So let's say they don't like Shedeur Sanders. They don't like Jackson Dart or Tyler Shough or whoever that they're interested in, right? Let's say they just aren't going to take a quarterback in the first 2-3 rounds of this year. What do you think the ramifications would be for a team that starts, Spencer Rattler for 16, 17 games?
Well, I think they're going to end up with probably the first overall pick, probably close to it, if not the first overall pick. And I want to look at a team that recently, in the past couple of years, had done this before. The Chicago Bears had the number 1 pick. I don't think Justin Fields had inspired them in that season. And instead of sticking and taking a Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, they traded out of it, right? They took ironically got the 9th overall pick, just like the Saints have, traded back 1 with the Eagles and ended up with a right tackle named Darnell Wright. So I think Membu kind of follows the trend there, if you will. But I think waiting on a year and then banking on having a better QB usually isn't a good thing. Lucky for the Bears, the Panthers roster was pretty horrible, and Frank Reich didn't do much to elevate that roster. So the Bears ended up with the first overall pick the next year. But I think if you're the Saints or any other team that might want a QB but wants to wait till next year, let's say like the Giants or the Seattle Seahawks, the vision might be, let's get Arch Manning after he's draft eligible, right? Well, for one thing, we don't know if Arch Manning's going to go into the draft. He's probably going to make more at Texas with NIL than he would being the first overall pick in that first year, just because of how valuable his name brand is. We don't know if Garrett Nussmeier, who's the son of the Saints offensive coordinator Doug Nussmeier, we don't know if he'll have a good senior season or grad senior season. The same with Drew Aller or Cade Klubnik. I think we always fall into the trap of the next QB class is going to be better, but then it doesn't work out that way. Players go back to school, like Arch Manning might go back. I think Lenore Sellers, I think he's eligible, right? Because he wasn't a true freshman this year, but he could probably go back. Just how good he is, he could get quite the deal from South Carolina. And then you're stuck with, oh, well, let's get a receiver this time and then wait for the QB again. And then you keep pushing that down the road. That's just never going to work out. I think if you truly have conviction on a player to be your franchise quarterback, you should be willing to take that same player at 30 or at number 1. And so with the Saints, I don't think trading back into the first round is an option if you want QB. I think you just need to stick at 9 and take the QB.
Yeah, I think there's really 2 points that I kind of want to make here. And like you said, I think the grass is always greener when you're looking at, next year's quarterback class. Really, this goes every single year, right? Mm-hmm. Looking back a year ago, Carson Beck, projected top 10 pick. He's going back to school, Miami. If he declared, he would have been probably a day 3 pick, right? Mm-hmm. Quinn Ewers, another guy who was projected potentially as a top 10 pick, right? He's like you say, not a very good quarterback, can't throw over the middle, didn't develop in what you wanted to see him do. Uh, he's going to be either a day 3 pick or potentially even undrafted, right? So those are two guys who are projected, top 5 picks going into the year, right? Even Shedeur Sanders, people were very high on him coming into the year, and rightfully so. And he is probably going to be a first round pick. But I think this time last year, people were still higher on Shedeur Sanders than what he is right now. So obviously you have Cam Ward, who was more of a day 2 kind of prospect this time last year.
Well, he declared for the draft, if you remember, and
That's
then
right.
withdrew his name and went to Miami. I think he was more day 3 coming out of Wazoo, but really went back and up to stock, right? So, like you're
Yeah.
saying, Carson Beck could do that this year, also going to Miami. I think Quinn Ewers could have benefited from staying and transferring to, maybe Tennessee would be would be calling his name with some of the current events there. But yeah, the grass just isn't always greener, even though we say it is, especially if you're a team that needs a QB and punts on it. I know as Panthers fans, we were saying it for every year since we missed out on Justin Herbert when he went 1 pick before Derek Brown.
Yeah. And I think the other point that I want to make here is it only takes one win to move you from the first pick to the
Yeah.
5th pick, right? So even if, right, Arch Manning is exactly what people think he is, we haven't seen too much of him, so I'll withhold judgment for now. But I reserve the right to come back to this and say, yeah, I'm not sure that he was, as solid of a first overall pick prospect as what we thought. Um, even if he is what people think, or even if it's like Lenore Sellers or Garrett Nussmeyer, if it's one of those guys who's, a certified number 1 overall quarterback prospect, there's the possibility that, the Saints just aren't even there at the first overall pick. They have an older roster of guys that are going to want to win, right? Cam Jordan, Chase Young, Jordan Reed, Justin Reed.
Justin.
Yeah, Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, they've invested a ton in their offensive line. This isn't exactly a team that's completely bare in talent. They have, playmaking type of players that are going to win them more than 2-3 games, I think. So it's kind of that situation where even if they're starting, a guy like Spencer Rattler, I still think they somehow, some way end up with 3-4 wins, enough to get them, right to that 4th to 6th overall pick, and kind of in purgatory. So even if, you have a guy like Arch Manning there, which, like you said, it's not always greener. I'm not quite sure that the Saints are even going to be in a position to get a guy like that without giving up significant capital. So it's much easier said than done to wait a year on quarterback, because even then, the Saints win 1-2 games. Who's to say they don't even move on from a guy like Kellen Moore or Mickey Loomis? I think Loomis has probably got a lifetime contract there, but
He has to. Yeah.
right. I mean, he controlled the Pelicans too for a while in New Orleans. So I think that it's an interesting conversation with the Saints, because there's just not a quarterback worth taking with this 9th overall pick. But at the same time, can you really afford to wait? So they're in an interesting spot. Let's move on to the Dallas Cowboys, and I'll let you take the lead on this one. I think that, they have so many different ways that they could go. And I think it's even more funny just because of the amount of fans that they have, and different directions that they potentially could go. And it's all like skill position guys, which makes it even more fun. Like whether it's a corner, wide receiver, maybe a running back like a Marion Hampton. Maybe they take a guy like Kenneth Grant, just solidify the inside of their defensive line. But I want to get your thoughts on the Dallas Cowboys.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the fans to start. One of my good friends from high school, and he was one of my roommates in college. He was a Dallas fan, and the whole adage is that they're obnoxious, right? Like, this is our year, we're going in. That seems to have deflated over the past few years. I think that like they haven't felt the Cowboys energy, and a large part of that is due to like unimpressive and stagnant rosters, right? You talked about the skill position guys being big areas of need, like Matthew Golden, the receiver, could be an option. McMillan, the receiver, could be an option. Hampton at running back. And then the defense as well has some spots where maybe if they get another Michigan nose tackle like Kenneth Grant, just one more Michigan nose tackle, that'll solve all their defensive issues. But I want to kind of shift the focus to their offensive line, right? They drafted a couple rookies last year, and Tyler Guyton really didn't show a ton of promise at left tackle. They lose Zach Martin, who is going to be a Hall of Famer at the right guard spot. I know this doesn't really affect what their line did last year, but Tyron Smith, their superstar left tackle for so
Yeah.
many years, signed a one-day contract to retire with them. You want to know the reason why Dak was so successful his rookie year and Ezekiel Elliott was so successful? It's because they had the best offensive line of the entire millennium. Since the year 2000 turn, that Tyron Smith, Travis Frederick, Zach Martin O-line was so stout and allowed them to do so much. That line is long gone, and we lose the very last bastion of it with Zach Martin retiring. And that's just one of the things I think about every time I go to do a mock draft for them or something like that. Could Kelvin Banks or Gray Zabel be in play? Or if Membu makes it to them at 12, that's got to be something, right? Because he has to be an upgrade over Terrence Steele. I think the way for the Cowboys to go forward, much to the chagrin of Jerry Jones, who says they need to add skill players, I think they really got to reinvent that offensive line. And once we see somebody start to slip on DraftNet, because we will, if Will Campbell isn't a Patriots fit or if Membu doesn't go to the Jets or something, that's going to be something I'm honed in on while I'm watching the draft.
In theory, this should be a spot where somebody falls into their lap, right?
Mhm.
12th overall pick, there's always somebody that, people expect to be top 8, top 9 that kind of falls into, the early teens. I think the Cowboys could be in a perfect spot to get a guy like, I don't know, if Jalen Walker falls into
Yeah.
the spot, or maybe they're really high on one of Membu or Campbell and they happen to fall into the spot. I think it's more likely with a guy like Membu, right? But I think this is kind of been labeled as a skill position type of draft for the Cowboys when, like you said, it's a lot of their weaknesses. Not only are they skill position deficient, but they kind of need to eat their vegetables too.
Yeah.
Like they need a right guard. They need an upgraded right tackle, even though they've paid Terrence Steele a ton of money. They need a nose tackle. Like they've needed a nose tackle for the past half decade, it seems like, and they just keep missing on guys. Like Mozzie Smith they made him lose a ton of weight for no reason to
Mhm.
play a different role than what he played in college, even though, he played nose tackle. They drafted him to be a nose tackle. I don't know what was going on there. I think Kenneth Grant would make a ton of sense for that interior defensive line to give them somebody next to, Osa and Micah Parsons that can actually stop the run, because those two guys aren't going to do it, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they're a Michael Williams or a Shamar Stewart team, get a bigger defensive end opposite Micah Parsons. But I think it's a fun, like there's really not a single position that they could rule out other than quarterback with this pick. Like I could see them taking a corner. Maybe they like Malachi Starks quite a bit. Wide receiver, running back. This is a really fun Amari and Hampton destination potentially. Really, this spot and the Chicago Bears are two that I really want to see Hampton land on, just because I think it would be fun to see him go, early round 1 rather than to the Broncos or Chargers later on. But I think this could be a sneaky Hampton team. I think Jalen Walker is somebody that if he's there, he makes so much sense as somebody that can, affect two different levels of the defense. Early downs, maybe you stand him off the ball. And then, on pass rushing downs, you have both him, you have Micah Parsons, you have Osa, you have a lot of juice on the defensive line. So I think he would be a home run pick for the Dallas Cowboys if he's there. But it's just kind of wide open right now for the Cowboys.
For sure. I think you nailed it. I don't think they're going to go QB because Jerry just ate his money and paid Dak. But even QB long term could be something because Dak's always in trade rumors for whatever reason with the Cowboys. Looking at their roster, it's like, do you have solid starters at every position, like the top 11? And the answer is no. Jalen Walker, I think, would be interesting, right? Because if his ceiling is to be reached, it's the Micah Parsons path, right? So the organization should have an idea of how to develop somebody like that. I think I gave them Will Johnson in my kind of like chaotic mock draft, excuse me, where you don't do the chalk pick, and that makes sense to me too, right? Trayvon Diggs has missed quite a bit of time over the past couple of years, despite them just paying him. So you could have an answer there. Jihad Campbell seems like a natural fit, right? Because they've needed linebacker help for the greater part of the last half decade, so that could be something. This is really the first team. I think we talked about the Saints and the Cowboys that you could really see any direction for either of those teams to go in. I think the Cowboys in particular, once we get outside of the top, maybe 6 to 8 guys, like the true blue chippers, I think if we see the Cowboys go in a certain direction, maybe receiver or maybe like edge rusher, they could be the true team to kick off our run, like our first true run that we see in the first round.
This just feels like the Matthew Golden team, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Like
I think
it's such a
that
seamless fit with them, and I know the Dolphins, maybe they want to add another speedster, but I think that Golden is such a seamless, perfect fit with the Cowboys. Jerry likes his big name, like big name school players too, right? So Texas, the hometown hero, would be a perfect fit there.
yeah, that would be a fun fit. I think just giving Dallas an over the top threat, kind of opened things up for CeeDee Lamb. We kind of saw what Xavier Worthy was able to do for Rashee Rice in Kansas City. Obviously, not a perfect comparison, but just getting a space type of player to kind of create space for underneath guys like CeeDee Lamb. You can move him all across. And I think it would really accelerate CeeDee Lamb, even though he was already like one of the league's best receivers. So that makes a ton of sense for the Cowboys. Let's move on to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this one is really interesting because they don't have a quarterback, but they aren't really moving as though they're concerned about it, right? And that kind of leads me to think that maybe they know something about Aaron Rodgers, or maybe they have a plan with this 21st overall pick that we don't necessarily expect, or maybe it's a Jalen Milroe or a Tyler Shough if they're expecting Sanders and Ward to be gone. So I want to get your thoughts on the Steelers with the 21st overall pick.
Well, if you're watching on YouTube or Twitter, you just saw me look over here and type, and I was looking to see what pick Kenny Pickett was taken. It was the 20th pick, so one pick earlier than the pick they have this year. I think that if the Pittsburgh Steelers think that the Saints aren't going to go QB, they might just be willing to let it ride and just go let any QB fall to 21 and go, all right, we can make this work with Shedeur Sanders. We can make it work with Jalen Milroe as he develops, Jackson Dart maybe, or just take somebody to fit their offense, like an Amarian Hampton, if he makes it there, or something to that effect, maybe an offensive lineman. But I think you brought it up well. They're operating as if there's not a problem at QB. To me, that signals that they might have an agreement with Aaron Rodgers that if night one doesn't go their way, if they don't get the QB they want to fall to them, or they're not willing to trade up to, say, like the Panthers pick or pick 6 or 7 to leapfrog the Saints, then maybe they're okay with just taking best player available. I think they could use another corner as well. I'd like to put Jahdae Barron with their team to match with Joey Porter Jr. Maybe that's the direction they go in, but I think even more so than the Saints, they're probably the team that needs a QB the most. I would say outside of Tennessee, right? Because we know they're picking Cam Ward. But Pittsburgh and probably the Browns need the QB. So I think this is one to watch for QB. But if we don't see one here, I struggle to see where any QB is taken outside of a round 2 trade up for some of the teams that missed out on Cam Ward.
Yeah, I think this is the sneaky Shedeur Sanders team, whether it's via a trade up. I know they're missing their second round pick, which they traded for DK Metcalf, but maybe they trade future capital, right? Maybe they're the team that tries to come up ahead of the Saints with, the 7th or 8th pick, and, they're selling their 2026 first rounder to do so. I think that would probably be a mistake based off of what, at least I think of Shedeur Sanders as a prospect, but I wouldn't rule out the possibility of the Steelers being aggressive in that way. They've shown, that they're willing to be aggressive for the select player, right? They traded a first for Minkah Fitzpatrick, obviously a second for DK Metcalf. So they've shown a willingness to kind of move around and try and target the players that they're looking at in particular.
Did they not also trade up for Broderick Jones to leapfrog the Jets that year,
They did.
to take
Yeah.
the tackle? Yeah. So I think you're right. That certainly can be aggressive. And if they think that Shador Sanders could give the same level of what 2024 Russell Wilson could give, which I don't think they're too far off on those fronts, maybe it's something they pursue.
Yeah, I mean, 2024 Russell Wilson isn't necessarily the bar that I'd want from a first round quarterback, but I think that, if that's what you're getting as a rookie, that's, pretty decent. Um, I really do think this is the Rodgers team. At least that's kind of what it's shaping out to be. And it would be funny to see Rodgers in a system run by Arthur Smith, right? Like, it just doesn't really in my head compute. But I think that it could also be the QB3 team, whether it's Jalen Milroe. I think makes a lot of sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I know you agree with that take in particular. Maybe they're the Jackson Dart team, maybe they're the Tyler Shuck team, but Milroe in my head is the one that at least makes the most sense out of those three.
Yeah, I think Milroe would work quite well in the Arthur Smith system. I think he could bring an element to the run game, and we know Arthur Smith likes to run the ball. I know maybe a couple weeks ago, like I was kind of locked in on this one, right? I think I said you can write it in paint or something. I'm not quite there right now. I actually like him as one of the maybe trade up into the end of the first round for a guy that missed somebody. I know he would fit Brian Dable's scheme. His former offensive coordinator in 2023 at Alabama is now the Cleveland Browns offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees. So that might be a trade up team with the Browns holding the 33rd pick. But I think he would fit here too. It really just depends on who these teams are convicted on, right? Because after Ward, it's kind of pick your flavor. I think Shador Sanders is like he can operate your system. Dart is kind of a question mark because of his offense, and then Milroe has the high floor as an athlete. And I can't really. Well, I guess Justin Fields had a high floor as an athlete, and they were able to go 4-2 or 4-1 with him this past year. If they can get that level out of Jalen Milroe, it might be worth it. He might have the similar outlook last year, like Justin Fields had, as I think 2024 Russ has to Shador Sanders. And if they're able to continue their winning streak there, or their streak of not losing, maybe it's worth it to them.
Steve and I talked pretty extensively about the idea of Milroe having a high floor because of his rushing upside, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that bare minimum, if you're starting Jalen Milroe as your quarterback, and especially in an Arthur Smith type of system, you're at the very least going to have a top 10 rushing offense. And I think that floor is really valuable. And I think what Jalen Milroe is going to give you as, a deep ball thrower, as somebody who's still going to be able to develop as a passer, that to me is worth more of a bet to the Steelers in particular than a guy like Jackson Dart, who, has less rushing upside. There's a little bit of questions about his ball placement, ability to run an actual NFL offense. And Tyler Shuck is, a different set of problems in my head with the 21st overall pick, but Milroe makes the most sense to me. And I could even see them, maybe they trade back from this spot, try and recoup some capital from the DK Metcalf trade. And maybe they take a guy like Jalen Milroe, like 28, 29, and let one of these other teams come up for maybe a tackle, maybe an edge, something like that.
Yeah, I really like that idea. And I think this is a good transition to like who can trade up at the back half of the first round, because we always see it, right? I think the Steelers are a natural spot. The Vikings for me though are like the trade spot. I think we talked about that the last time you and I were on this show, that they only have 4 picks, right? You can count them on one hand how many picks they have. And if they want to get more darts to throw at the board, this might be the like I was talking about, the Browns to go get their QB from 33, or the Giants. I think the Giants have 34. Or this could be the tackle team, right? Once you get past Will Campbell, Armand Membu, and we didn't really mention Kelvin Banks, but I think there are teams within the teens he could fit in quite well. You're kind of scratching for who's the next tackle, right? And we usually see at least 4 or 5 of these guys go in round 1 just because of how important the position is. If the Patriots decide to go Jalen Walker or Mason Graham or Ashton Genty for that matter, they still need a left tackle. They don't have a left tackle on the roster that I think is worth starting in an NFL game, especially to protect your young QB. So this could be a team that moves back into the first round for maybe Josh Connerly or somebody of that measure. For Josh Simmons, who we learned, I think, last night, will be attending the draft in person in Green Bay. So
Right.
there's a good chance he goes in the first round, along with the other, I think it's 17 total participants there. So teams must like him a lot if they're willing to invite him out to the actual draft show. Maybe that's a guy. Maybe Connerly, we mentioned, who's very, very young, has a ton of upside from Oregon. Or maybe there's like a sneaky guy that moves up. Pre-show, we were talking about how there's always somebody, right? Cole Strange moved up, I think, to 25 with the Patriots almost 5 years ago now. Ricky Pearsall moved up quite a bit for the 49ers. Xavier Legette, I think, was around 50 on consensus. He moved up to 32. There's always somebody that sneaks in. And I think tackle is probably the most premium position that doesn't have the full group of first round evaluated players, right? Like we have a ton of edge rushers that are going to go round one. We have quite a few D linemen, but offensive tackle, especially in the trenches, that left tackle spot, there's only those three guys. So I think somebody is going to want to move up for him. Patriots is one. The Chiefs are another one. The Chiefs, they've tried to do it in the second round the past couple of years, and it hasn't worked either time. So maybe they're just fed up with it. They traded up for Xavier Worthy last year, if I recall correctly. So maybe they're willing to trade up for a tackle this year.
Yeah, they paid Jalen Moore 2 years, $30 million. That was a lot for a guy who played less than 200 snaps last year at left tackle. He was like a backup for the 49ers for a while. So they to me seem like a team that would be in on a guy like Josh Connerly, Josh Simmons, one of those two in particular. Maybe even a Donovan Jackson. Maybe somebody sees him as a left tackle because he played pretty well down the stretch for Ohio State. The one that I think is really interesting, and this is kind of based off of what he did with the Saints, but Sean Payton has historically been incredibly aggressive trading up in the first round. He did it for Brandon Cooks. He gave up a first round pick to move up in the first round for Marcus Davenport. He's always been willing to move up to get the guy that he wants in particular. He wanted Mahomes reportedly. That didn't happen. I don't even know how real that was.
Yeah.
Or if he's
I think every coach that passed on him wanted him,
Right. So I think that the Broncos make a ton of sense if Ashton Jeanty is there at pick 8, 9, 10. I could see the Broncos giving up, a second round pick this year, a second round pick next year, maybe a little bit more to move from 20 to, the late single digits or the early teens if a guy like Jeanty is there. I think, that's exactly the type of guy that Sean Payton wants to add to his offense. And a little bit of revisionist history. The Broncos almost traded up for Christian McCaffrey in 2017.
Yeah, that's true.
If you remember that. Obviously, Sean Payton wasn't there at that point, but it's kind of funny to think that, what didn't happen in 2017 could end up happening this year with, superstar caliber running back going to Denver. The other one that's interesting to me is the Packers have a very clear need at edge. They have Rashawn Gary, but outside of that, it's just a bunch of just kind of random miscellaneous players. I think Mike Green would be an awesome fit opposite of, Rashawn Gary. Maybe you add Lucas Van Ness in that rotation as well. If they move up to, I don't know, the late teens for a guy like Mike Green, maybe they like Shamar Stewart a lot, although that would be kind of a funny fit, having selected Lucas Van Ness, another project just a few years earlier. That one's interesting to me. And then the reported interest from the Titans in a receiver is also interesting, where, maybe they like an Emeka Egbuka in the late first round, or they want to add a playmaking receiver like Luther Burden. I think they're a team that could very easily give up, an early day 3 pick, move up a few spots into the first round and snag a 5th-year option on a receiver, similar to what the Panthers did last year.
Yeah, I like all the teams you mentioned going in order. With the Broncos, the McCaffrey trade's funny, right? Because they have the McCaffrey legacy there. Ashton Jeanty, not quite the same legacy, but Boise State is the Broncos, so I guess you have a little bit of connection there, like astrological or ethereal connection there with the
Same name, same
same
colors too.
name, yeah, same colors too. I didn't even think about that. And that is a person or like a player that I think Sean Payton would love. I, for one, would love to trade back with him because I would probably demand next year's first to go all the way back to 20.
Yeah,
But I'm not sure if that would be the cost for a running back. But I could certainly see that one. The Packers, it's interesting. Every time I've looked at them for mock drafts for like writing, edge has always been the number one position. I think defensive linemen as well, like their entire defensive front could use an upgrade. I think Walter Nolan can naturally fit in there. They always do
that'd
a
be a
good
great
job of
fit.
extracting the highest value out of their defensive linemen. I think Rashawn Gary is a great example. We think about Rashawn Gary being this really good player. When he was drafted, people were shocked because he did not display that potential consistently at Michigan, but they drew it out
Yeah.
of him. Maybe they can get Walter Nolan like that, or James Pierce Jr., somebody that I know both of us are high on, but it seems like off-field stuff and maybe effort stuff is driving him down. That could be a fit. Mike Green, like you said, could be a fit. I don't think they would take anything on Shamar Stewart after not getting the highest value out of Van Ness, but we'd have to see. And then the Titans for receiver. It kind of reminds me of how CJ Stroud reportedly, I don't want to say like demanded, but like told the front office, hey, get Tank Dell. This is my guy. And it worked out really well for him in his rookie season. Maybe Cam Ward has a connection to a special receiver. Maybe not in round one, but they play Kyle Williams and he played
Yeah.
together at Wazoo. Maybe that's like a trade up into the middle of round two from round three kind of deal there if they miss on their guy at the start of the second round. But I think wanting to get a receiver with juice, especially for Cam Ward, because they still have Tyler Boyd, right, who like didn't play a ton last year. Calvin Ridley isn't at his highest level, and then I would assume Traylon Burks is their next receiver who hasn't provided the value you'd want from a first round pick, excuse me. So maybe they do trade it for a receiver with some juice. Maybe if Matthew Golden slips to like 24 with the Vikings or something,
Yeah.
right? Maybe that's a natural trade up spot for them.
I wonder how much Cam Ward values Kyle Williams because we've kind of seen his stock rise a little bit. And this isn't my idea. I think it was Matt Harmon said earlier this week that, Kyle Williams could be a sneaky type of player at 33 overall, which would be a bit rich for me. I think that, even those who are highest on Kyle Williams, Chris Sims excluded, he's his wide receiver too. I think that would still be just a little bit rich for a guy like him. The Titans actually don't have a third round pick this year. They
Right.
traded that for L'Jarius Sneed. So I think that maybe it's even a trade down spot and maybe they take a Kyle Williams like, 45, 46 overall rather than 33 and recoup some day two value.
This is what I would ask you in response to that. How rich of a pick was Ricky Pearsall for you? If I personally had Pearsall like in my 40s or maybe 50s, so it wasn't
Who's the
too big for me, but it was still like, oh my goodness, this is our sixth receiver, not Xavier Legette or Jalen Polk or Adonai Mitchell for that matter. It was Pearsall.
Yeah.
Kyle Williams for me is somewhere close to the 70s. I think that would be quite the jump, but if the rookie QB wants his guy to be familiar with, I could certainly see it. I don't think trading into the first round, but pick. I think they have 35 because the Browns, Giants, and Titans all have the same. So they rotate. So I think they have 35, but I could certainly see that being a pick if it makes their rookie QB more comfortable.
Yeah, I think with Pearsall, I was mid second round is when I was kind of thinking with him, but he was one where I think what made it more shocking is I don't think anybody had mocked him in the first round, even though everybody was kind of around 45 to 50 with consensus on him. And usually you see those guys mocked in the first round, but with there being as many receivers as there were last year towards the top half of that draft, I think that's why we didn't see any mock drafts with Pearsall's name in it. But yeah, Kyle Williams would be, I think, another level of reach where, you're taking a guy a round and a half sooner than what he probably should be. So that would be an interesting pick. I think Jalen Knoll also makes a ton of sense for the Titans.
I think maybe better analogy might be like a Braden Swinson sneaking into the end of the first round with edge, right? Because
Yeah,
we have like 10 first round edges that have circulated through the first round. A guy like him sneaking into the first would be more comparable. But yeah, they just need juice. The Titans do at
right.
receiver, and I'm not sure that a guy like McMillan or Jaden Higgins, like some of these bigger bodied receivers, sideline winners, can necessarily bring that. So Kyle Williams makes a ton of sense. Jalen Noel. If they wait till later, I'm big on Dante Thornton,
Yeah,
excuse me, from Tennessee. With the Nico Iamaleava stuff going around, you see all of his highlights from Tennessee, and Thornton probably has 20 touchdowns this year if Nico hits him on his stuff. So I think he's kind of a sleeper in this class. Maybe he's a guy that can bring juice to the Titans, but yeah, I think receivers certainly a need for them. Maybe the biggest need for them on the offensive side of the ball outside QB.
yeah, and I think they've done a really good job rebuilding their offensive line. So it'll just be about seeing, what's going to be the best possible weapon to add for Cam Ward, right?
Mhm.
But I think we're done. We've covered Patriots, Saints, Cowboys, Steelers, a ton of trade up possibilities for tackle, receiver, even the Packers for an edge, possibly. We've hit a lot of different topics today. One thing that I'm going to once again implore people on is check out our draft guide. We put a ton of work into it, a ton of man hours. It's really, really got some great visuals. There's a ton of information. Me, Jacob, our content head, Steve, and Colt, our graphic designer, worked tirelessly on it for what would you say, like a month and a half, 2 months, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an effort for sure. So if you haven't already, check out our draft guide for 2025 and follow our Twitter as well. You can find Jacob at Jacob LaQuire, me at dj.png. You can find the 2 point conversion at 2p_conversion. And you can follow the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. Jacob, anything you want to cover before we get out of here?
Nothing other than I'm looking forward to the draft, and I think we have some stuff working on day one and day two of draft night. So stay tuned for that.
Yes, plans are not final, but we're looking to kind of figure out when we're going to be streaming on day one, on day two of the draft. We are going to be live at some point. It's just kind of figuring out the in between details for that. So stay tuned for that. We will be back on Thursday. Jacob, I'm not sure if you'll be here on Thursday, but somebody will be here joining me for another podcast on football talk. So, yeah.